The conference room went dead silent. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence where you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of a nervous finger on the mahogany table. On the wall, the projector screen was painted in cascading crimson error messages. A system that had cost $120 million to build was completely dead. Lawrence Abbott, our chief executive officer, stood at the head of the table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his phone. He had been on a call for the last hour with our largest client, trying to explain why their transactions had vanished into the digital void. He demanded answers. Right now. Oliver Preston, our vice president of operations, fumbled with his laptop, sweat beading on his forehead. Oliver was the one who had pushed for this system optimization, claiming it would improve efficiency by 40%. He had brought in a young consultant named Bryce Miller from Apex Digital Solutions, who sat beside him looking equally pale. The incident log showed the system crash started at 9:58 p.m., with the first warning coming in at 8:47 p.m. When Lawrence asked who was supposed to be monitoring the database, Oliver stammered that the new automated intelligence system was supposed to handle it. The monitoring system was part of what had crashed. When Lawrence demanded to see the change authorization and the approval signature for the budget optimization, he found Oliver's signature. The memo restricted overtime for legacy IT staff, replacing them with automated systems. The legacy staff was me. I had been with the company for 18 years. My name is Diana Vance. I am a senior systems administrator. I designed the failover systems that kept the company running through regional power outages. I had spent nearly 2 decades writing custom recovery scripts, setting up database mirroring, and ensuring that our transaction log shipping never lagged. But to Oliver, I was just outdated staff whose salary was a burden on the operational budget. When Lawrence asked why I had not responded to their frantic calls, Sean Reynolds, my colleague from network operations, spoke up. He pointed out that it was past 10 p.m. and my overtime had been cut. I was simply following the corporate policy that Oliver had signed. The CEO's face went white when he realized the consequences of Oliver's budget cuts. He ordered Oliver to get my approval form processed immediately. But let me back up 12 hours to when this disaster started. I started at this firm when I was 26, fresh out of college, full of energy and big plans. Now I am 44, married to Roger, and we have 2 kids, Toby, who is 12, and Lily, who is 9. My job is keeping servers running and databases operational, ensuring that millions of transactions are processed without a hitch. The email came on a Tuesday morning. It announced that all overtime hours required pre-approval from leadership due to budget optimization, and legacy staff compensation was being reviewed. Legacy staff, that is what they called me. 18 years of 60-hour weeks, of answering calls at 2 in the morning and canceling family dinners. Now I was legacy. I went to Oliver's office to get clarification. He was doing bicep curls with an adjustable dumbbell. Oliver was new, been with us 14 months, coming from a tech startup that had burned through investor money before imploding. He talked about disruption and agile methods but knew nothing about the systems. When I asked about the overtime policy, he smiled that fake smile. He said they were trimming fat and getting lean. He told me the world had moved on to cloud infrastructure and automated monitoring, and that legacy staff were outdated. It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. I went back to my desk, my anger simmering. I had given this company 18 years. I had missed Toby's first steps and Lily's birthday party because the server crashed. Roger and I had postponed vacations and anniversary dinners, and now I was outdated. I opened my calendar and disabled my monitoring schedules. Every automated check I had set up to run after hours was gone. Every alert I had configured to ping my phone outside business hours was turned off. The early warning systems I built were disabled. If they wanted me working 9 to 5, I would work 9 to 5. Not a minute more. Sean Reynolds rolled his chair over. He was a good network manager who had been here 7 years. He warned me that Oliver was going to run the place into the ground with his new policies. Sean was frustrated because he had a family vacation planned, and he knew that without overtime pay, nobody would cover the network if it crashed. I spent the rest of the day documenting my systems, noting that they were now only monitored during business hours per the new overtime policy. When I got home at 5:30, Roger noticed. I was never home that early. I told him they cut my overtime and called me outdated. Roger, who manages a construction crew, understood the value of experience. He asked what I would do. I told him I would work my hours and nothing more. That night I slept better than I had in years. No phone on the nightstand, no laptop on the dresser. The next day, I worked steadily, but when 4:45 rolled around, I shut down my systems and set my status to offline. At 5 p.m., I walked out of the building. It felt like a rebellion. The setting sun hit my face, and for the first time in 18 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of remote responsibilities. I was off the clock, and the company would have to manage without my constant vigilance. The first few days under the new policy were surprisingly quiet. I arrived at the office at 9 in the morning, did my work, and logged off exactly at 5 in the afternoon. Sean Reynolds watched me with a mixture of awe and concern. He knew that the systems I managed, particularly the transaction processing engine of Valerius Financial Group, were delicate. They were complex systems that required human hands and years of experience to maintain. Sean had been with the company for 7 years, and he had seen enough database lockups to know that without constant monitoring, we were playing with fire. But Oliver was determined to prove that his modern approaches could replace old-school expertise. The following Monday, Oliver called a department meeting to introduce the team from Apex Digital Solutions. Bryce Miller, the lead consultant, stood at the whiteboard and drew circles representing cloud nodes and automated scripts. He was young, wearing an expensive designer shirt, and spoke with an intense, fast-talking startup energy. He spoke about real-time compliance checks, server virtualization, and how modern companies did not need manual database administration anymore. He asserted that human monitoring was not only inefficient, but also introduced unnecessary risk. Oliver sat at the head of the table, nodding along and looking pleased with himself, as if he had just discovered the secret to infinite profit. I sat in the back of the room, silent, and took notes in my notepad. When Bryce finished his presentation, I raised my hand. I asked if their proposed configuration accounted for the triple verification protocols mandated by our financial compliance framework. I explained that our database processed transactions that required separate validation from the trading desk, the compliance engine, and the clearinghouse. I asked how their system would handle serialization locks during peak volumes. Bryce waved his hand dismissively, saying that their proprietary automated intelligence took care of all data integrity checks. He claimed that legacy systems were over-engineered and that they would simplify the database hierarchy within 2 weeks. I pointed out that simplification in a financial database often meant removing critical redundancy, which could lead to compliance failures under the law. Oliver interrupted me, his voice sharp. He told the room that we needed to move fast and be agile, and that legacy thinking would only hold the company back. He told us he had full confidence in Bryce's team and that their decision was final. After the meeting, Sean came to my desk. He looked worried and told me that the Apex team was already modifying the test environment and that they wanted access to the production servers by the end of the week. I warned Sean that if they bypassed testing, they would trigger compliance errors that could halt the entire platform. Sean agreed but said that Oliver had given them full authorization and anyone who opposed them would be flagged as uncooperative by human resources. I spent the afternoon documenting all my custom maintenance scripts. I created a comprehensive document detailing every workaround I had implemented over the years. I explained the database vacuuming routines, the log rotation schedules, and the lock detection scripts. I made sure to explicitly note in each file that these systems were no longer monitored after hours. I did not do this to be malicious. I did it because it was my job to provide documentation, and under the Fair Labor Standards Act, I was prohibited from working off the clock without pay. If the company wanted to run the network without me after 5 p.m., they needed to know how the gears turned. When 5 p.m. arrived, I shut down my laptop, packed my bag, and walked out. I went to the grocery store, bought ingredients for dinner, and helped Lily with her math homework. For the first time in years, I was present for my family. Roger noticed the change, saying I looked less tense and that my eyes were not glued to a screen. But he also warned me that people like Oliver did not take defeat lightly. Roger had managed construction crews for years, and he had seen project managers try to cut costs by using cheaper materials. He said that when the concrete cracked, those managers always tried to blame the workers who poured it. He told me to make sure my paper trail was clean. I told Roger that I had documented everything and that the email paper trail showed the overtime ban was Oliver's decision. Thursday came, and the Apex consultants began their migration on the primary trading cluster. Sean told me that they were disabling the warning flags that had been throwing alerts in our logging system. He said Bryce called those warnings legacy noise that flooded the dashboards. The warnings were actually early indicators of database lockups, but the consultants did not understand that. They thought they were optimizing the system. I checked the system logs before leaving at 5 p.m. and saw the database queues beginning to swell. I wrote a detailed log entry, assigned it to the team queue, and shut down my computer. I walked out of the building, leaving the growing queues behind. It was a tomorrow problem, and for the first time, I did not feel guilty about leaving it. By the following Tuesday, the Apex digital consultants were in the final phase of their optimization project. They had virtualized the main transaction database and removed 2 of the 3 failover servers to save on server maintenance costs. Oliver Preston had already sent a report to Lawrence Abbott, boasting that his operations restructuring would save the firm $300,000 annually in infrastructure costs alone. He failed to mention that the infrastructure he cut was the safety net, keeping our clients' money secure. He was so focused on the short-term savings that would secure his quarterly bonus that he ignored the systemic risks he was creating. He believed that the automated intelligence monitoring would handle any issues, but he did not understand that the software could not replace the physical server architecture. Sean Reynolds told me that the consultants had disabled the triple verification checks on all trades under $50,000. This was a critical security protocol that I had spent years refining to prevent duplicate transactions and ensure legal compliance. I went to Oliver's office to discuss this change and explain the potential issues. I explained that under federal financial guidelines, including Section 404 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, we were legally required to maintain strict internal controls over financial reporting and transactions. Bypassing triple verification, even for smaller trades, was a regulatory violation that could result in criminal penalties for the executives and a massive audit by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I wanted Oliver to understand that this was not a technical preference, but a strict legal requirement. Oliver did not care. He leaned back in his chair, played with his golf club, and told me that my legal interpretations were outdated. He said the automated intelligence system validated the transactions, and that was sufficient. He told me that if I spent less time looking for problems and more time supporting the modernization, I might have a future in the department. He added that in the new streamlined organization, there would be no room for administrators who could not adapt to modern standards. I kept my voice calm and focused. I told him that as a licensed administrator, I had a duty to report system changes that violated federal regulations. He smirked and told me to do whatever I felt was necessary, but reminded me that he was the one who approved my performance reviews. I left his office and immediately sent an email to the compliance officer, Gary Nelson, detailing the changes Apex had made to the transaction database. I copied Sean and Oliver on the message. I wanted a permanent record of my warning to protect myself from any future blame. I also filed a formal report with the Internal Compliance Committee, attaching the database logs that showed the disabled verification checks. I knew that if the system failed, Oliver would try to deny knowing about the changes, and I wanted my paper trail to be ironclad. I refused to let his negligence ruin my career. On Friday afternoon, Oliver held a department meeting to celebrate the completion of the optimization. He had ordered pizza and stood at the front of the room, raising a glass of sparkling water to toast Bryce Miller's team. He declared that Valerius Financial Group was now a modern, agile institution. He looked at me and said that even the legacy staff had to admit that the transition was seamless. I smiled, ate my slice of pizza, and said nothing. The systems were running, but they were running on borrowed time. The database was processing transactions. But because the compliance checks had been disabled, the error logs were growing. The automated intelligence was supposed to resolve these errors, but it was simply archiving them to save disk space. It was like sweeping dirt under a rug and claiming the house was clean. Over the weekend, I spent time with Roger and the kids. We went to Toby's soccer game, cheered from the sidelines, and then took a long walk in the park. I spent the afternoon teaching Lily to ride a bike and watching Toby practice his soccer kicks, reflecting on how much of their childhood I had missed due to late-night database crashes. My phone stayed in my bag. I did not check it once. When I returned on Monday morning, Sean looked exhausted. He said he had been getting minor alerts all weekend, but because his overtime was also restricted, he had not logged in to check them. He said the database was running hot, and the storage arrays were filling up with archived error logs. I checked the primary systems. The latency was increasing, and the trading desks were beginning to complain about slow execution times. I filed a critical warning ticket detailing the storage issues and the database latency and assigned it to Oliver's team. At 4:45 p.m., the system threw a major database error. It was the first sign of a lockup. I documented the warning, added it to the queue, and logged off. At 5 p.m., I walked out of the building. My workday was over, and the consequences of Oliver's decisions were about to arrive right on schedule. The disaster unfolded exactly as I had predicted. At 8:47 p.m. on Tuesday, the primary transaction database at Valerius Financial Group hit its storage limit. The archived error logs had filled the partition, and the system could no longer write new transaction data. Because the triple verification checks had been disabled, the database attempted to process a batch of international trades without proper validation flags. The system compliance engine detected the unauthorized transactions and immediately triggered a security lock. The primary database went dark. The automated intelligence monitoring system, which was supposed to resolve issues, tried to restart the database, but because the failover servers had been removed, it had nowhere to route the traffic. The backup database attempted to initialize, but it froze in a half-configured state. By 9:58 p.m., the entire system was dead. Over $47 million in pending transactions were stuck in digital limbo. If the trades were not processed before the Tokyo markets opened, the company would face massive financial losses, legal claims from wealthy clients, and immediate regulatory sanctions from the federal authorities. The trade execution table partition hit its limit, causing all insert statements to fail with a database lockup error. My phone began ringing at 10 o'clock. The caller identity showed Oliver's number. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, Oliver called again. I declined the call. My phone buzzed with an email notification from the CEO, Lawrence Abbott, demanding that all IT staff log in immediately. I set the phone on the kitchen table and went back to helping Lily with her homework. Roger looked at me from the couch. He asked if that was them calling for help. I told him it was. He smiled and said I should let them sweat since they had called me outdated. Roger shared a construction analogy about a project manager cutting steel reinforcements to save money, only to have the second floor collapse under its own weight. At 10:17 p.m., Sean Reynolds sent me a text. He wrote that the transaction system was down, the failover was frozen, and the CEO was in the conference room. He said Oliver and Bryce were losing their minds and could not diagnose the issue. Sean wrote that the CEO was pacing around the mahogany table, and he was so angry that he threw his pen at the wall. He said Bryce was typing frantically but had no idea what was wrong because the compliance module was encrypted. He said Oliver was trying to find the contact details of the Apex manager, but nobody was answering their phones. Sean begged me to log in and save the network. He wrote that the CEO had threatened to fire the entire operations team if the system was not restored before midnight. I texted back, stating that under the Fair Labor Standards Act, I was prohibited from performing unpaid work. I wrote that since my overtime had been cut, I required a written and signed emergency overtime authorization form before I could perform any after-hours administrative work. I told Sean that performing off-the-clock work would violate labor laws and expose the company to legal liabilities, so I must follow policy. I told Sean that once the form was processed by human resources and signed by management, I would log in. 10 minutes later, Oliver sent the form via email. He had scrawled his digital signature at the bottom, listing the reason for overtime as a critical system failure requiring immediate assistance. He had also added a brief note asking me to hurry. I did not log in yet. I replied to the email, pointing out that company policy required confirmation from the Human Resources Department for emergency overtime authorization outside regular business hours. I copied Evelyn Cho, the Director of Human Resources. I knew that without Evelyn's confirmation, Oliver could easily claim later that my overtime was unauthorized and deny my pay. I was determined to follow every rule to the letter. At 10:44 p.m., Evelyn sent the confirmation. The overtime was officially approved. I opened my laptop, connected to the virtual private network, and joined the conference call. The room was in chaos. I could hear Oliver shouting at Bryce and Lawrence Abbott demanding updates. I spoke up, my voice calm and clear. I told them I was logged in and asked Oliver to explain the situation. Oliver began babbling, saying that the system had crashed and that they needed a rollback immediately. I told him that rolling back the system now would erase the $47 million in pending transactions, causing permanent data loss. I explained that the database had entered a compliance lock because they had disabled the verification checks, and a rollback would destroy the transaction history, making it impossible to audit. The CEO was silent for a long moment, then asked if I could fix it without losing the data. I told him I could, but it would require rebuilding the verification pipeline manually, a delicate process that would take hours of focused work. Lawrence agreed and ordered everyone else to let me work without interruption. He told Oliver to sit down and be quiet, and warned Bryce that Apex would be held fully liable for any financial losses. I could hear the desperation in Oliver's voice, but I remained focused, ready to begin the work. I began the recovery process at 11 p.m. I instructed Oliver and Bryce to stay off the servers and not to touch anything. Oliver tried to interrupt, asking for constant status updates, but I told him that if he wanted the system restored, he needed to let me work. I muted the call and focused on the database. Rebuilding a verification pipeline on a live system is delicate work. I had to restore the triple verification protocols without dropping the pending transaction queue. I began with the failover database, manually validating each layer of the transaction cluster. I verified the compliance markers, ensuring that every trade met the regulatory standards under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. I manually executed database queries to rebuild the index tables and clear the partition lock. By 12:47 a.m., the failover database was operational. I received a text from Lawrence Abbott, thanking me and telling me that I had his full support. I did not reply. I focused on the backup database. The backup database recovery was more difficult because the automated intelligence optimization had overwritten the database routing tables. I had to search through my archived backups to find the original configurations that I had kept. I manually rebuilt the routing structures, verifying each connection. By 1:38 a.m., the backup database was restored and synchronized. That left the primary database, which handled 90% of the firm's trading volume. The primary database was in a state of corruption because Bryce's optimization had merged independent processes. I spent the next 2 hours unwinding the changes, restoring security checkpoints, and rebuilding the verification pipeline. At 2:43 a.m., I discovered that a custom script I had written 5 years ago to handle international currency conversion had been deleted. I did not have a backup of that specific script, so I had to rewrite it from memory. It was 300 lines of complex code, but I worked steadily. The currency conversion script was critical because Valerius Financial Group processes millions of dollars in foreign trades every hour. And without it, our Asian and European clients would be locked out of their portfolios. I spent 30 minutes double-checking the exchange rate integration, ensuring that the currency data flowed correctly without any data loss. I also verified the connection protocols for the Tokyo database mirroring, making sure that when the markets opened, the systems would synchronize seamlessly. It was exhaustive, detailed work, but I was determined to do it right. By 3:52 a.m., the script was complete, integrated, and validated. I brought the primary database online and watched as the $47 million in pending transactions processed in the correct order with valid timestamps. By 4 o'clock in the morning, every system dashboard turned green. I unmuted the call and told Lawrence Abbott that the systems were operational. The CEO thanked me, saying that I had saved the company from a catastrophe. I closed my laptop and finally slept. On Monday morning, I walked into the office. The atmosphere was tense. Sean Reynolds met me with a cup of coffee and told me that Oliver Preston had been fired. A company-wide email from Lawrence Abbott confirmed that Oliver had been relieved of his duties and that I was appointed acting director of IT operations. The email also stated that all system optimization projects were frozen pending executive review. At 10 a.m., I attended a meeting with Lawrence, Evelyn Cho, and Winston Davies, an operational restructuring consultant. Lawrence apologized for the overtime cuts and the disrespect. He announced that my compensation was restored with a 15% increase and that they wanted to make the director position permanent. Winston Davies agreed, saying that experience was the safety net of the firm. He asked me to provide a complete report on the incident, including the regulatory violations. He noted that he had never seen an engineer restore a dead database of that scale without losing a single transaction. I agreed to have it done by the end of the day. In the following weeks, I accepted the permanent director role, hired 3 new administrators, and established strict change management protocols. Legal investigations revealed that Oliver had a conflict of interest, as he had been promised a lucrative position at Apex Digital Solutions in exchange for hiring Bryce's team. They found emails where Oliver promised to steer the $300,000 contract to them if they hired him. Valerius Financial Group filed a lawsuit against Oliver and Apex for damages and breach of fiduciary duty in the local district court, and contacted the regulatory authorities to report the incident. At home, things settled into a healthy balance. I worked hard but set clear boundaries, ensuring I was present for Roger, Toby, and Lily. I learned that standing up for my boundaries did not make me outdated. It made me indispensable. I had proven that experience matters, and that the old ways are sometimes the safest ways to keep a business running. I realized that the ultimate revenge was not watching Oliver fall, but building a department where experience was valued and respected. Lawrence Abbott checked in with me regularly, ensuring that we had the budget we needed. Winston Davies stayed on as an advisor, helping us draft new policies that required executive review before any senior administrator's pay could be altered. Sean Reynolds became my second-in-command, managing the network infrastructure with the resources he had always deserved. We rebuilt the systems, this time with double the redundancy and clear documentation. I had taken a stand and the company had listened. The systems were safe and my family was happy. In the end, the legacy staff had saved the day, and we had done it by the book, using the laws of the land and the experience of a lifetime to protect the business we had helped build.